On Father's Day, my son lied that we were going to a restaurant and abandoned me at an old train station. He handed me $10 and said, "That's all you deserve. I hope you manage to survive." When he got back home, I was already there with an envelope. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I should have known something was wrong when Raymond called me 3 days before Father's Day. He never called unless he needed money, and he hadn't visited since Christmas. His voice sounded different on the phone, almost forced, like he was reading from a script. "Hey, Dad, I was thinking we should do something special this year. Just the two of us. How about dinner at that steakhouse you used to take me to when I was a kid?" My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. After 3 years of being a widower, after months of eating frozen dinners alone while watching the evening news, the idea of spending time with my son felt like a gift I didn't deserve. Margaret had been gone for 3 years now, and Raymond had grown even more distant since her funeral. I thought maybe, finally, he was ready to rebuild our relationship. "That sounds wonderful, son. What time should I be ready?" "I'll pick you up around noon. We can take our time, maybe drive around a bit first, catch up." I spent the next 3 days cleaning the house, ironing my best shirt, and trying to remember the last time Raymond and I had a real conversation. It had been so long since he'd shown any interest in my life. Since Margaret died, most of our interactions consisted of him asking for money to cover rent or car payments. I always gave it to him, hoping that maybe this time he'd stay a little longer, ask how I was doing, or even just sit with me for a cup of coffee. On Sunday morning, I was ready an hour early. I kept checking my watch and looking out the window, feeling like a teenager waiting for his first date. When Raymond's beat-up Honda finally pulled into the driveway, I grabbed my wallet and practically ran to the car. He looked tired when I got in, his eyes red-rimmed and his hair unwashed. He'd lost weight since Christmas, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. For a moment, I felt that familiar pang of worry that had followed me through his entire adult life. "You okay, son? You look a little run down." He shrugged without looking at me. "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired from work." I knew he'd been unemployed for months, but I didn't say anything. Raymond had always been sensitive about his job situation, and I didn't want to start an argument on what was supposed to be our special day. As we drove, I tried to make conversation. I told him about the new medication my doctor had prescribed for my arthritis, about the neighbor's cat that had been coming around for food, about the book I was reading. Raymond responded with grunts and one-word answers, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. "Remember when you were little and we'd go fishing at Miller's Pond?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "You caught that tiny bluegill and insisted we take a picture like it was a trophy base." "Yeah, I remember," he said flatly. His jaw was clenched, and I noticed a muscle twitching in his cheek. We'd been driving for about 45 minutes when I realized we weren't heading toward the restaurant district. The buildings were getting sparser, and I could see railroad tracks in the distance. "Raymond, where are we going? I thought we were having dinner." He didn't answer. His breathing had gotten heavier, and his face was flushed. When he finally pulled over, we were at an abandoned train station that looked like it hadn't seen a passenger in decades. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and most of the windows in the small station building were broken. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" I laughed nervously, thinking this had to be some kind of joke. "Raymond, what's going on?" I said, "Get out." His voice exploded in the small car, so loud and sudden that I actually flinched. My hands were shaking as I opened the car door. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and the air smelled like hot asphalt and something rotting. Raymond got out too and walked around to my side of the car. For a moment I thought maybe this was all a misunderstanding, that he was going to explain what we were doing here. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. He threw it on the ground at my feet. "There. That's all you deserve, old man. I hope you figure out how to survive because I'm done carrying your dead weight." I stared at the money on the ground, not understanding. "Raymond, I don't—" "What are you talking about? What did I do?" His face was twisted with an anger I'd never seen before, not even during his worst teenage tantrums. "What did you do? You ruined my entire life. That's what you did. You and that woman you married." You think I don't know how you replaced my mother like she never mattered? Son, Margaret never tried to replace your mother. She loved you like her own. Shut up. He stepped closer to me, and for a moment I was actually afraid of my own child. Don't you dare talk about love. You don't know what love is. All you know is how to be a burden, how to make everyone around you miserable. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. Raymond, please, I don't understand why you're so angry. Can we just talk about this? Can we go somewhere and... No, I'm done talking. I'm done pretending to care about some pathetic old man who never should have been a father in the first place. He got back in his car and rolled down the window. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Try not to die out here. The engine roared to life, and gravel sprayed as he peeled out of the parking lot. I stood there watching his taillights disappear down the empty road, the $10 bill still lying in the dirt at my feet. The silence that followed was deafening. No cars, no people, just the sound of wind whistling through the broken windows of the abandoned station. I was 60 years old, stranded in the middle of nowhere, abandoned by the son I'd raised and loved and sacrificed everything for. I picked up the $10 with trembling hands and looked around at the desolate landscape. In that moment, standing alone in that God-forsaken place, I realized that Raymond hadn't just left me at a train station. He'd shown me exactly how much I meant to him, and the truth was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. I stood in that empty parking lot for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The shock of what had just happened kept washing over me in waves. My own son, my only child, the boy I'd rocked to sleep when he had nightmares, the teenager I'd stayed up all night helping with college applications, the young man I'd co-signed loans for when banks wouldn't give him a chance. The sun was getting higher and sweat was starting to drip down my back. I looked at the $10 bill in my hand, then at the empty road stretching in both directions. I could wait here and hope someone would come along, or I could start walking. At 60, with my arthritis acting up and wearing dress shoes that weren't made for hiking, neither option seemed appealing. But sitting here feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to get me home. I started walking east, toward where I thought the main highway might be. Each step sent a sharp pain through my left knee, and my feet were already starting to blister in my good shoes. The heat was brutal, and I hadn't thought to bring water. Why would I? I thought I was going to dinner with my son. As I walked, my mind kept replaying Raymond's words. You ruined my entire life. You never should have been a father. The venom in his voice when he talked about Margaret. I tried to understand where all that hatred had come from. Raymond was 12 when his mother died. Cancer took her fast, just 8 months from diagnosis to the end. I remembered how lost he'd been, how angry. He'd stopped doing homework, started getting into fights at school. I was drowning in my own grief, working 2 jobs to pay off her medical bills, and trying to be both mother and father to a boy who seemed to hate the world. Margaret came into our lives 2 years later. I met her at the grocery store. She was the pharmacist who always took extra time to explain my medications, who asked about Raymond and remembered his name. She was patient and kind, everything I needed during that dark time. When Raymond graduated high school, she was there cheering in the stands. When he got accepted to college, she helped me figure out the financial aid paperwork. She never tried to replace his mother. She called herself his bonus mom and always spoke respectfully about Linda, even keeping her picture on the mantle. But Raymond resented her from the beginning. He saw her as an intruder, someone who was stealing his father's attention. A truck horn blared, jolting me back to the present. I'd been walking for over an hour, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. A semi-truck was pulling over about 50 yards ahead of me. I picked up my pace as much as my aching legs would allow. The driver was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She rolled down her window as I approached. "You okay, honey? You look like you've been walking a while." "I'm fine," I said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that must sound. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. My son left me at that train station back there, and I need to get home." Her eyes widened. "Your son left you on purpose?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Well, that's just awful. Where do you live? I can't take you all the way, but I can get you closer to town." As we drove, she told me about her own father, who died the previous year. He was 83 and still trying to help everyone in the family, always putting our needs before his own. I can't imagine treating him the way your son treated you. Her kindness made my chest tight with emotion. A complete stranger was showing me more compassion than my own child had. Can I ask what happened? You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I found myself telling her everything. About Margaret, about Raymond's resentment, about how I'd tried so hard to keep our family together after she died 3 years ago, about how Raymond only called when he needed money, how he never visited, how he seemed to blame me for everything wrong in his life. How much money have you given him over the years? She asked. I thought about it. His college tuition was $60,000. I paid off his credit cards twice. That was another $15,000. I helped him with rent more times than I can count. I bought him 2 cars when his kept breaking down. When he got married and divorced, I paid for the lawyer, probably close to $200,000 over the years. He whistled low. And he still treats you like this? That's when it hit me. Raymond didn't just resent me for marrying Margaret. He resented me for being a burden, for being poor, for not being the successful father he wanted. He saw me as someone who held him back instead of someone who had sacrificed everything to lift him up. But there was something Raymond didn't know, something I'd never told him because I wanted him to make his own way in life, to be independent. Margaret had been from a wealthy family. When she died, she'd left everything to me. Her parents had both passed years earlier, and she had no siblings. The house, the investments, the life insurance, it all came to me. I was worth almost $3 million, and Raymond had no idea. The trucker dropped me off at a gas station about 5 miles from my house. I called a taxi with the $10 Raymond had thrown at me, adding my own money to cover the fare. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw that Raymond's car wasn't there. He was probably at a bar somewhere, celebrating his freedom from his burden of a father. I sat in my living room, looking at the framed photos on the side table. Raymond's graduation, his wedding, holidays with Margaret. In every picture where Margaret appeared, Raymond looked sullen or was standing as far away from her as possible. How had I missed the signs? How had I convinced myself that time would heal his anger? I walked to my bedroom and opened the safe behind the dresser. Inside were Margaret's jewelry, our important documents, and her will. I'd never changed the beneficiary on my own will. Raymond was still set to inherit everything when I died. But as I sat there in the quiet house, still feeling the sunburn from my walk and the blisters on my feet, I realized something had changed. The son who'd thrown $10 at me and left me to die in the desert didn't deserve Margaret's legacy. He didn't deserve the money I'd saved and invested and carefully managed. I thought about Margaret's last words to me in the hospital. Take care of yourself, Larry. Don't let anyone take advantage of your good heart, not even family. For the first time in 3 years, I was beginning to understand what she meant. I showered and changed clothes, trying to wash away the memory of that desolate train station. My feet were raw with blisters, and my shoulders were sunburned, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I kept replaying Raymond's face when he threw that money at me, the cold satisfaction in his eyes as he drove away. After putting on comfortable clothes and bandaging my feet, I went to my office, the small room Margaret had helped me set up for paying bills and managing our finances. The oak desk had been hers, inherited from her father. She'd always been better with money than I was, teaching me about investments and savings accounts and planning for the future. I pulled out the folder labeled Estate Planning and spread the documents across the desk. $3,400,000. That's what Margaret's careful financial planning had left me with. The house was paid off, worth about $400,000. Her investment portfolio had grown to $2 million. The life insurance had been another $1 million. And I'd been living so modestly, barely touching the principal, that it had continued to grow even after her death. Raymond knew none of this. I'd never wanted him to see me as a source of money. Never wanted him to stick around just for an inheritance. I'd wanted him to love me for who I was, not what I could give him. Looking back now, I realized how naive that had been. Raymond had been treating me like a bank for years, and I'd been too blind to see it. I was still sitting there, staring at the numbers on the page, when I heard a car door slam outside. My heart jumped. Could Raymond have come back? Could he have realized what he'd done and returned to apologize? I looked out the window and saw his Honda in the driveway. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe the drive home had given him time to think. Maybe he'd realized how cruel he'd been. I stayed in my office listening as his key turned in the front door. I expected him to call out, to look for me, to at least check if I'd made it home safely. Instead, I heard him go straight to the kitchen and open the refrigerator. The bottle opener clinked against glass. He was getting a beer. My office door was cracked open just enough for me to hear him talking, though I couldn't see him. At first, I thought he was talking to himself, but then I realized he was on the phone. "Yeah, I did it," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I finally told the old man exactly what I thought of him. My stomach clenched. He was bragging about what he'd done. "You should have seen his face when I dumped him at that train station, like a lost puppy." Raymond laughed, and the sound made my blood run cold. $10, that's what I gave him. Told him that's all he deserved. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Who was he talking to? A friend? A girlfriend I didn't know about? Trust me, it felt good to finally be honest with him. I'm so tired of pretending to care about some pathetic old loser who never amounted to anything. At least when he kicks the bucket, I'll inherit this place and whatever money he's got saved up. The casual way he talked about my death, like he was discussing the weather, made my hands shake. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. I know, it sounds harsh," he continued, "but you don't understand what it's been like. Having everyone feel sorry for me because my dad's such a failure. Living in this crappy little house, watching him count pennies at the grocery store. And don't even get me started on Margaret, that gold-digging witch who manipulated him into marriage." I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. Margaret, who'd been nothing but kind to him. Margaret, who'd left him birthday cards every year even after he'd made it clear he didn't want her in his life. He'll probably live another 10 or 15 years the way old people do, but at least now I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to visit on holidays or call to check up on him. I'm done playing the good son. There was a pause, and I could hear him taking a drink. "What do you mean? What if he heard me? He's not here. Genius. Probably still wandering around in the desert somewhere trying to find his way home. Maybe he'll learn a lesson about being such a burden on everyone." Jambur. The cruelty in his voice was like a physical blow. This wasn't anger speaking. This was years of resentment and contempt that he'd been hiding behind fake smiles and awkward holiday visits. "Look, I gotta go. I want to grab some of his food before he gets back. If he gets back," another laugh, "I'll call you tomorrow." I heard him hang up and walk to the kitchen. Cabinet doors opened and closed as he rummaged through my pantry. The refrigerator door slammed. He was taking my food, eating in my kitchen, after abandoning me in the middle of nowhere. I sat frozen in my chair, afraid to move, afraid he'd discover I was there. My son, the baby I'd held when he took his first breath, the child I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and worried about every single day of his life, had just described me as a pathetic burden he couldn't wait to be rid of. The worst part was realizing that this was how he really felt. Not just today, in a moment of anger, but apparently for years. Every time he'd called asking for money, every awkward visit, every forced conversation, he'd been pretending the entire time. I'd been living in a fantasy, believing we had a relationship, when really I was just a nuisance he tolerated for financial gain. I heard him moving around the living room, probably looking for anything valuable he could take. Then his footsteps headed toward the front door. A few minutes later, his car started up and pulled out of the driveway. I waited another 10 minutes before leaving my office, making sure he was really gone. The kitchen was a mess. He'd left an empty beer bottle on the counter, crumbs on the floor, and the milk carton sitting out. In the living room, I noticed that Margaret's small silver picture frame was missing from the side table, the one with her parents' wedding photo. He'd stolen from me. After everything else, he'd actually stolen from me. I sank onto the couch feeling like I'd aged 10 years in the space of a few hours. The son I thought I knew didn't exist. The relationship I'd been trying so hard to maintain was completely one-sided. All those years of making excuses for his behavior, of telling myself he was just going through a rough patch, of hoping that someday we'd be close again. It had all been a lie I'd been telling myself. But Raymond had made one crucial mistake in his calculations about my death and his inheritance. He thought he was getting the house and whatever small savings a working-class widower might have accumulated. He had no idea that Margaret's legacy was sitting in investment accounts growing every month. He had no idea that the pathetic old man he'd abandoned at a train station was worth more money than he'd ever see in his lifetime. And after overhearing that phone conversation, I was beginning to think that maybe he didn't deserve to know. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My sunburned shoulders were stiff, and the blisters on my feet made walking painful. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. I kept hoping that maybe yesterday had been a nightmare, that I'd imagined the whole horrible experience. Then I saw the empty beer bottle Raymond had left on my kitchen counter, and reality came crashing back. I was making coffee when I noticed something glinting under the couch. When I bent down to look, I found Raymond's phone. He must have dropped it when he was rummaging through the living room last night. My first instinct was to call him to let him know he'd left it behind. Then I remembered the conversation I'd overheard, and anger flared in my chest. The phone wasn't locked. Raymond had never been good with technology security. I told myself I was just looking for contact information so I could return it to him. But once I had it in my hands, I couldn't resist scrolling through his recent messages. What I found there made my blood run cold. The most recent conversation was with someone named Jessica. I scrolled up to read the earlier messages, and my stomach turned. "Can't wait to get this over with," Raymond had written the day before. "Taking the old man out for Father's Day. Should be fun." "You're really going to do it?" Jessica had replied. "Hell yes. I've been planning this for weeks. Time to show him exactly what I think of his pathetic life. What if he tells people what you did? Who's he going to tell? He doesn't have any friends. And even if he did, who would believe that a loving son would abandon his father? I'll just say he got confused or wandered off. Everyone knows old people get dementia." "You're terrible," Jessica had written, but she'd added a laughing emoji. "I'm practical. The sooner he realizes what a burden he is, the sooner he'll stop expecting me to pretend I care." I had to sit down. This hadn't been a moment of anger or frustration. Raymond had planned to abandon me. He'd thought it through, plotted it out, even discussed it with his girlfriend like it was some kind of joke. But the messages got worse. Scrolling back further, I found conversations from the past few months that made my hands shake with rage and heartbreak. My dad called again. He'd written to Jessica in March, wanted to know if I was coming for Easter. I told him I was working, but really I just can't stand being in that depressing little house with him moping around. "Why don't you just tell him you don't want a relationship?" "Because I still need the inheritance money. The old fool doesn't have much, but the house has got to be worth something, plus whatever savings he's got. I figure another 10 years and I'll be set." 10 years. He'd calculated how much longer I was likely to live, planning to fake a relationship with me for another decade just to inherit my house. In February, there was an exchange that made me feel physically sick. Dad's been calling every day since the anniversary of Margaret's death. Says he's lonely and wants to talk. I've been letting it go to voicemail. "That's kind of sad," Jessica had replied. "It's pathetic. He's a grown man crying about some woman who's been dead for 3 years. I mean, I get that he misses her, but move on already. I told him he should try online dating or something, just to get him off my back." "Did he?" "Hell no. He's too much of a loser to attract anyone. Besides, who wants to date a 60-year-old janitor with no money and a dead-end life?" "Janitor." He'd told his girlfriend I was a janitor. I'd worked as a maintenance supervisor at the school district for 35 years, managing a team of 12 people and overseeing the care of 8 different buildings. It was honest work that I'd been proud of, work that had provided for my family and earned me respect in the community. But Raymond was ashamed of me, so he'd lied about even that. I kept reading, and each message was like a knife twisting in my chest. "Dad sent me another check for $500, he'd written in January. "Says it's to help with groceries. I'm going to use it for that weekend trip to Vegas. Doesn't he need that money? He's got Social Security and his pension. He'll be fine. Besides, what's he going to spend it on? Bingo games and early bird dinners? In December, around Christmas time. Had to go to Dad's house for dinner. 3 hours of listening to him talk about Margaret like she was some saint. And the food was terrible. He tried to make her recipe for prime rib, but completely screwed it up. I smiled and pretended it was good, but honestly, I threw most of it away when he wasn't looking. I remembered that dinner. I'd spent 2 days preparing, trying to recreate Margaret's Christmas meal because I thought it would make Raymond happy. I'd noticed he wasn't eating much, but he'd said he loved it. He'd even asked for seconds, though now I realized he'd probably just pushed the food around his plate. At least he gave me a good Christmas present, Raymond had continued. $1,500 for car repairs. My car runs fine, but he doesn't need to know that. The $1,500, I'd saved for months to give him that money, skipping meals out and buying generic groceries so I could help him with what he'd said were urgent repairs. He'd hugged me and told me I was the best father in the world. All lies. Every moment of affection. Every thank you. Every time he'd called me Dad with seeming warmth. It had all been an act. But the worst discovery was yet to come. Scrolling back to November, I found a conversation that made my vision blur with rage. Dad's been talking about updating his will, Raymond had written. Says he wants to make sure everything is in order. I'm worried he might leave money to charity or something stupid like that. Can you find out what's in it? I tried looking through his desk when he was at the grocery store, but everything's locked in a safe. I know the combination, though. It's Margaret's birthday. He's so predictable. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. He'd been in my safe. He'd violated my privacy, gone through my personal documents while I was out buying groceries. Find anything interesting? Jessica had asked. Just boring stuff. Insurance papers, some old photos. But get this, apparently Margaret had some money saved up when she died. Not a lot, maybe 20 or 30,000. I had no idea the old man was holding out on me. 20 or 30,000. He'd seen Margaret's financial statements and completely misunderstood them. The documents in my safe were just summaries, not detailed account information. He had no idea about the real extent of Margaret's wealth because he'd only looked at the top page of each statement. Think he'll leave it all to you? He better. I'm his only family. But with my luck, he'll probably donate it to some stupid charity for stray cats or something. Old people do sentimental crap like that. Maybe you should talk to him about it. You know, remind him how much you love him. God, that's disgusting. But you're probably right. I'll start being extra nice, visit more often, play the devoted son until he kicks the bucket. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was a poisonous snake. Everything made sense now. Raymond's sudden interest in spending Father's Day with me. His awkward attempts at conversation during the drive. He hadn't been planning to take me to dinner at all. He'd been planning to abandon me from the beginning, but he'd made a fatal error in his scheming. He thought Margaret had left $20,000 or $30,000. He had no idea that she'd been worth millions, that she'd left me everything, that the pathetic old man he'd abandoned in the desert was actually wealthy enough to change his life forever. And after reading those messages, after seeing the calculation and cruelty behind every interaction we'd had, I knew with absolute certainty that Raymond would never see a penny of Margaret's money, not if I had anything to say about it. I picked up his phone and deleted our text conversation history, then placed it back where I'd found it. When Raymond came looking for it, he'd never know I'd read his messages. He'd never know that his cruel game had finally been exposed. But he was about to learn that some games have consequences he never saw coming. I spent the rest of Monday in a strange state of calm clarity. The shock and heartbreak of the previous day had crystallized into something harder, more focused. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my own life. At 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, I called Robert Hensley, the estate attorney, who had helped Margaret and me with our wills 5 years earlier. His secretary tried to schedule me for the following week, but I insisted it was urgent. Mr. Patterson, it's good to hear from you, Robert said when I arrived at his office an hour later. Though I have to say, you look like you've been through something difficult. I could see my reflection in the window behind his desk, the sunburn across my nose and forehead, the tired lines around my eyes. You could say that. I need to make some changes to my will, Robert. Significant changes. He pulled out my file and reviewed the documents. Currently, everything goes to your son Raymond, with a small bequest to the animal shelter. Are you looking to add other beneficiaries? I'm looking to remove Raymond entirely. Robert's eyebrows went up. That's a major change, Larry. Can I ask what prompted this decision? I told him about Father's Day, about being abandoned at the train station. I didn't mention the phone messages. That felt too private, too humiliating to share even with my attorney. But I described Raymond's words, his cruelty, the way he'd driven off laughing. I see, Robert said quietly. And you're certain this wasn't just a moment of anger that he might regret? I'm certain, I said. My son has made it clear that he sees me as a burden he can't wait to be rid of. I won't reward that attitude with an inheritance he doesn't deserve. It took 2 hours to restructure everything. The house would go to the local homeless shelter. They could sell it and use the proceeds to help people who actually needed assistance. Margaret's investment portfolio would be divided between 3 charities: the Cancer Research Foundation, where she'd volunteered, the Children's Literacy Program at the library, and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. What about your son? Robert asked as we finalized the documents. Even a small bequest might... Nothing, I said firmly. Raymond will receive exactly what he gave me when he abandoned me. Nothing. When I got home, Raymond's car was in the driveway. My pulse quickened, but not with hope this time. I was curious to see how he would act now that he thought he'd successfully put me in my place. I found him in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich with my groceries. He looked up when I walked in, and I was struck by how normal he seemed, how relaxed. There was no guilt in his expression, no sign that he'd spent the last day agonizing over what he'd done. "Oh, hey, Dad," he said casually, like nothing had happened. I came by to get my phone. "Think I left it here last night?" "Last night?" I kept my voice neutral. "You were here last night?" "Yeah, I stopped by after our drive. Wanted to make sure you got home okay." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it was almost impressive. "Found the door unlocked, so I figured you made it back safe." I watched him take a bite of his sandwich, the turkey and cheese I'd bought for my own meals this week. "How thoughtful of you to check on me." "Of course, you're my dad." Another lie, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, how did you get home anyway? That was pretty far out there." "I managed," I said. "Found some kind people willing to help." Good. I was worried about you walking all that way." He paused, studying my face. "You look a little sunburned. Hope you didn't have to walk too far." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He was enjoying this, testing to see how much he could push me, how much of his fake concern I would swallow. "I'm fine," I said. "Just glad to be home." "Well, like I said, I just came by for my phone. Have you seen it?" I pointed toward the living room. I think I saw it under the couch. While he searched for his phone, I watched him carefully. This was the son I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed for, and he was acting like abandoning me in the desert was just another Tuesday. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong. When he found his phone, he checked it quickly, scrolling through messages. I wondered if he was looking for more cruel commentary from Jessica about our Father's Day adventure. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work stuff." Another lie. I knew he'd been unemployed for months, living off the money I sent him and whatever his girlfriend contributed. He headed toward the door, then paused. "Oh, by the way, I might not be able to visit as much for a while. Things are getting busy, you know how it is." "Of course," I said. "I understand completely." "Great. Well, take care of yourself, Dad. Try not to wander off anymore, okay?" He laughed like he'd made a joke, but there was something cold in his eyes. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and realized this was exactly what I'd needed to see. Raymond felt no remorse about what he'd done. He thought he'd successfully intimidated me into accepting my place as the unwanted burden in his life. He had no idea that his cruelty had just cost him $3 million. Over the next few weeks, I began making other changes to my life. I canceled the automatic transfers I'd been making to Raymond's checking account, $500 every month that he'd been receiving for help with expenses. I also canceled the credit card I'd gotten him for emergencies, the one he'd been using to buy everything from restaurant meals to new clothes. I expected angry phone calls, demands to know why the money had stopped flowing. Instead, there was silence. Raymond didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send a text asking if I was okay. His absence confirmed what I'd already known. Our entire relationship had been built on financial transactions, not love. I started filling my days differently. I volunteered at the library's literacy program, something Margaret had always encouraged me to do. I joined a senior hiking group and discovered that my legs were stronger than I'd thought. I even started taking a cooking class at the community center, learning to make meals for one person instead of always hoping Raymond might stay for dinner. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring. I wasn't hoping for visits that never came or saving money for emergencies that always seemed to belong to someone else. I was living my own life, and it felt remarkably peaceful. The only contact I had with Raymond during those weeks was indirect. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, mentioned seeing him at the grocery store. "He asked about you," she said while we were both getting our mail. "Wanted to know if you'd been sick or anything. Said he'd been trying to call but couldn't reach you." I checked my phone. No missed calls from Raymond in over a month. "He seemed worried," Mrs. Chen continued. "Said he might stop by to check on you, but he never did," which told me everything I needed to know about the depth of his concern. 2 months after Father's Day, I received a call from Robert Hensley. "Larry, I wanted to let you know that all the paperwork is finalized. Your new will has been filed, and I've sent copies to the designated charities so they're aware of the eventual bequests." "Thank you, Robert. I feel good about these changes. There's one more thing we should discuss. Have you given any thought to what you'd like to happen with your personal effects? Photo albums, family mementos, that sort of thing?" I thought about Margaret's jewelry, still sitting in my safe. About the photo albums documenting Raymond's childhood, his school plays and soccer games and graduation ceremonies. About the letters he'd written me from summer camp, full of "I miss you, Dad," and "I can't wait to come home." "Donate everything," I said. "The homeless shelter can sort through it and keep whatever might be useful to their residents." "Everything? Are you sure you don't want to leave any personal items to your son?" "I'm sure. Raymond has made it clear that he doesn't value anything from his past with me. I won't force my memories on him." When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. The old Larry would have saved those photo albums, hoping that someday Raymond would want them, that they might spark some memory of better times. But that Larry had died at an abandoned train station on Father's Day. The new Larry understood something important. You can't love someone into loving you back. You can't sacrifice your way into mattering to someone who sees you as disposable. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to simply let them go. Raymond wanted his freedom from the burden of having a father who loved him. I was about to give him exactly what he'd asked for. 3 months after Father's Day, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to move. The house held too many memories of Margaret, too many echoes of the family life I'd thought I had with Raymond. Every room reminded me of holidays he'd endured rather than enjoyed. Dinners where he'd checked his phone more than he'd talked to me. Conversations where I'd done all the work while he'd counted the minutes until he could leave. I found a small apartment in a senior living community about 20 miles away. It wasn't assisted living. I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But it was a place where I could have neighbors my own age, activities if I wanted them, and the kind of community I'd been missing since Margaret died. The apartment was bright and modern, with a small balcony overlooking a garden. It was exactly the right size for one person who was finally ready to live for himself. I spent weeks sorting through 40 years of accumulated possessions. Margaret's clothes went to charity. Her books went to the library. Her jewelry I kept, not because I thought Raymond might want it someday, but because she'd loved those pieces, and they reminded me of her smile. The hardest items to deal with were the remnants of Raymond's childhood. His report cards stored in a file folder Margaret had labeled "Our Son's Achievements," his art projects from elementary school. The clay handprint he'd made me for Father's Day when he was 7, painted blue with "World's Best Dad," written in his careful second-grade handwriting. I held that handprint for a long time, remembering the little boy who'd been so proud to give it to me. That child had loved me genuinely, completely. What had happened to him? When had that love turned into the cold calculation I'd seen in his text messages? Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Maybe some questions didn't have answers worth finding. I packed the childhood mementos in a box and drove them to Goodwill. Let some other family find joy in finger paintings and school photos. Let some other parent feel the pride that Raymond's achievements had once given me. Moving day was easier than I'd expected. The moving company handled everything efficiently, and by evening I was sitting on my new balcony watching the sun set over the community garden. For the first time in months, I felt truly peaceful. I'd been living in my new apartment for 2 weeks when I decided it was time to write the letter. Raymond deserved to know that I was no longer available, to be his safety net, no longer waiting by the phone, hoping he might call. He deserved to understand that his actions had consequences, even if he'd never expected to face them. I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, trying to find the right words. How do you tell your only child that they've broken your heart beyond repair? How do you explain that love has its limits, even parental love? "Dear Raymond," I began, "by the time you read this, I will have moved out of the house where you grew up. I wanted you to hear from me what happened and why I made the choices I made. 3 months ago on Father's Day, you drove me to an abandoned train station and left me there with $10, telling me it was all I deserved. You said I had ruined your life and that you were done carrying my dead weight. You drove away laughing, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I want you to know that I made it home safely, despite your apparent hope that I wouldn't. I also want you to know that while you thought you were teaching me a lesson about being a burden, you actually taught me something far more valuable. You showed me exactly who you really are. I know about the text messages you sent to Jessica, planning my abandonment weeks in advance. I know you described it as fun and joked about telling people I had dementia if anyone asked questions. I know you've been lying to your girlfriend about my job, calling me a pathetic loser while taking my money every month. I know you've been going through my private papers, trying to figure out what you might inherit when I die. Most of all, I know that every moment of affection you've shown me in recent years has been an act designed to keep the money flowing until you could collect your inheritance. You succeeded in convincing me that I was a burden. You're right, I was a burden to you. I was the burden of having a father who loved you unconditionally. I was the burden of having someone who worried about you, supported you, and believed in you even when you'd given up on yourself. I was the burden of having a safety net you could always fall back on, no matter how badly you treated me. I won't be that burden anymore. I've moved to a place where I can build a life surrounded by people who actually want my company. I've changed my will, removing you as my beneficiary. The money you were counting on, Margaret's inheritance that you so grossly underestimated, will go to organizations that help people who are genuinely struggling, not people who are simply ungrateful. You wanted your freedom from me. Consider it granted. You wanted to be done carrying my dead weight. You are. You wanted me to understand what I deserved. I finally do. What I deserved was a son who loved me. What I deserved was a child who saw my sacrifices as acts of love, not stupidity. What I deserved was a family member who would never, under any circumstances, abandon an elderly parent in the middle of nowhere as a cruel joke. Since you were unable to give me what I deserved, I've decided to give it to myself. Peace, dignity, a life free from the constant heartbreak of loving someone who sees that love as weakness. You asked me once why I married Margaret, implying that I was somehow betraying your mother's memory. The truth is, Margaret saved me from becoming exactly what you accused me of being, a pathetic old man with nothing to live for. She taught me that I was worth loving, worth caring about, worth building a life with. When she died, I forgot those lessons for a while. Thank you for reminding me. I won't be changing my phone number or leaving a forwarding address. If you're ever in real trouble, genuinely homeless, seriously ill, truly desperate, you can reach me through Robert Hensley's law office. He has instructions to contact me only in actual emergencies. Otherwise, you've gotten exactly what you wanted. You're free from the burden of having a father who loved you. I hope that freedom brings you everything you thought it would. Goodbye, Raymond. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope with Raymond's name on it. Then I drove back to my old house one last time. The new owners weren't moving in for another week, so the house was empty. I let myself in with the key I'd kept and walked through the rooms one final time. In the kitchen, I could almost hear Margaret humming while she cooked. In the living room, I could see 7-year-old Raymond building elaborate cities with his Lego blocks. But I could also see the empty beer bottles he'd left on my counter, the missing picture frame he'd stolen, the casual disrespect he'd shown for everything this house represented. I left the letter on the kitchen counter, where he'd be sure to find it when he came looking for me, or his inheritance. Then I locked the door and drove back to my new life. 6 months later, I was sitting in the community garden at my apartment complex, reading a book in the afternoon sunshine. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Patterson, this is Robert Hensley. I wanted to let you know that your son has been trying to reach you. He's called my office several times, quite upset about some letter you left him. I see. Did he mention what specifically upset him? He seems to believe there's been some mistake about your will. He's demanding to see the documents, claiming you're not mentally competent to make these decisions. He's also threatened to contest the will on grounds of undue influence. I smiled, watching a butterfly land on the roses nearby. And what did you tell him? I told him that you're perfectly competent, that I have detailed records of our conversations, and that his chances of successfully contesting a will based on his own abusive behavior are essentially zero. I also reminded him that will contests are public record, and the details of why you disinherited him would become a matter of public documentation. How did he respond to that? He hung up, but Mr. Patterson, he seemed genuinely shocked by the amount involved. I think he had no idea about the extent of your assets. No, he didn't. Raymond thought Margaret had left me $20,000 or $30,000. He never imagined it was over $3 million. There was a pause. $3 million is a lot of money to walk away from over a family argument. Robert, it wasn't a family argument. It was 35 years of one-sided love finally reaching its breaking point. The money Raymond lost wasn't taken from him. It was never his to begin with. I earned the right to decide what happens to Margaret's legacy, and I've chosen to give it to people who will use it to help others rather than feed their own selfishness. I understand. Is there anything else you need from me? Just one thing. If Raymond calls again, you can tell him that I got his message loud and clear on Father's Day. I hope he got mine just as clearly. After I hung up, I sat in the garden for another hour, watching the sun set behind the trees. Tomorrow was Tuesday, which meant book club in the community center. Thursday was my volunteer shift at the literacy program. Saturday, the hiking group was exploring a new trail in the state park. My calendar was full of activities I enjoyed, people who appreciated my company, and purposes that gave my life meaning. Raymond had been right about one thing. I was finally free. Free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. Free from the constant disappointment of hoping he would change. Free from the crushing weight of being seen as a burden by the person I'd loved most in the world. I thought about the 7-year-old boy who'd made me that clay handprint, who'd called me the world's best dad. That little boy had been real, and his love had been genuine. I would always treasure those memories. But that little boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw relationships as transactions and love as weakness. And that man had made his choice on a Father's Day afternoon when he'd thrown $10 at my feet and driven away laughing. I'd simply decided to respect his choice and make one of my own. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my decisions. Margaret would have been proud of me for finally learning the lesson she'd tried to teach me in the hospital. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone continue hurting you. Sometimes freedom looks like walking away from people who can't see your worth. And sometimes the best inheritance you can leave behind is the knowledge that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed against someone who loves you unconditionally. Raymond had taught me that I deserved exactly what he'd given me that day, nothing. I'd finally learned he was right. I deserved nothing from him, and that realization had set me free.